I'm Raphael from Myocene company. Myocene, it's a Belgium-based company, and we develop a technology to objectively measure muscle fatigue. And we are convinced that this technology is a real game changer in the fatigue management of athletes. You will see this technique can really change this approach. Let me start by maybe something not very original, but presenting your day-to-day routine, I would say, your weekly routine with athletes. The role of strength and conditioning coach is to optimize the athletic performance of athletes. So you deal on a daily basis, weekly basis to monitor and individualize the training load. You do some testing with players, you manage the recovery. You also have to deal with injuries, as Federico mentioned. You also have the risk of loss of performance, overtraining. Well, I will say this is something that you are very used to it. To help you, technology nowadays is a must-have. If we look at all those technologies to measure the external load, I'm taking some example, the GPS tracking for players, or the power meters in cycling to measure the power output. I will say that this technology, wearable technologies, we also have that for even amateur athletes. They are very well under control. But if we look on the other side of this internal load, which are the physiological adaptation of this internal load, I will say that the methods mainly used to assess the internal load are based either on subjective perception, RPE tests, well-being score. You ask athletes how they feel, how they perform, and so on. Or based on performance tests. One of the most common one is a movement counter jump that I'm sure you perform that on a very regular basis. But you will admit that those two main methods, there are also some biomarkers, but let's say those two main methods are both based on voluntary movement or subjective perception. So we at Myocene, we really think that there is an unmet need to have much more accurate and objective measurement of the internal load. And that's what we propose with the Myocene system. It's a powerful tool to assess one aspect of the internal load, which is muscle fatigue. Brief summary of human muscle fatigue. The point here is not to go through all these aspects that you well know, but maybe to make a quick reminder and also present you which type of fatigue we assess with the Myocene system. So neuromuscular fatigue, there are two main roads, central fatigue, peripheral fatigue. Central fatigue, it's a decrease in the voluntary activation, while if you look at peripheral fatigue, it's more on the muscle side, and it's a decrease in the contractile strength of the muscle. Peripheral fatigue, we distinguish as well the short-term fatigue from the long-term fatigue. Short-term fatigue is related to a metabolic aspect, and I will say that this type of fatigue, athletes get rid of it in maximum couple of hours after a fatiguing exercise by just restoring the metabolic balance. If we look at the long-term fatigue, which is also called calcic fatigue because it's related with impaired calcium release, this type of fatigue could last till several days. So we easily understand that it makes sense to assess such type of fatigue with athletes who used to train almost on a daily basis. So this is the type of fatigue we assess with the Myocene technology. Now let's go through the scientific rationale behind this technology. How can we measure this long-lasting fatigue? You recognize this sigmoid curve being the temporal summation curve, the relationship between the nerve impulse firing the motor unit and the force. More you increase the frequency of the nerve impulse in Earth, more you increase the force developed by the muscle. You have here in blue the muscle in a rested condition. After fatiguing exercise, which induces fatigue, there is a move on the right of the value. And you have in red the same muscle, but in a fatigue condition. So if we fix the frequency of the nerve impulse, something that the central nervous system cannot do, but we use a stimulator, for instance, to define a specific frequency, we observe that the muscle in a fatigue condition, it's obvious, but develop less force compared to the same muscle in a rested condition. So we describe fatigue by being loss of force, loss of speed, but we could also describe fatigue by being less force for the same frequency of nerve impulse. What we can also observe is that at low frequencies, we are talking here between 10 to 20 Earth. The difference in force between the muscle in a rested condition and the muscle in a fatigue condition is greater compared to high frequencies. Okay, so the loss of force, they get a much more impact at low frequencies compared to high frequencies. That's why we also call this long-lasting fatigue or calcic fatigue low-frequency fatigue. Nothing new so far. This has been largely studied, and there's plenty of papers in the literature explaining this and objectivating this, demonstrating this type of fatigue since a long time. So which is the technique to measure this drop of force or this fatigue? Let's say measuring the ratio low to high frequency force allows to obtain a muscle index. So you will see on the animation, if we induce a contraction with a low frequency, we obtain a force at low frequency, and we will divide this value, it could be Newton, divided by the force that we obtain by a high frequency contraction. And in this case, we obtain an index. Okay? In case of the Myocene system, we call it the power index. We saw that after fatiguing exercise, there is a move on the right of the value. There is a significant drop of force at low frequencies. So if we repeat this low to high frequency ratio, force ratio, after fatiguing exercise, this value is significantly reduced, and so will reduce the index. So basically, we are comparing a baseline situation, the muscle in a rested condition. So the power index, so the index you will obtain at rest is always the same. This index is only affected after a fatiguing exercise because there is a significant drop of force at low frequencies, which makes that the index drop. All right? So this is for the rationale behind the technology. Let's talk about it now. Myocene system, we developed a device for the quad. Why the quad? Because quad is a key muscle for performance, to jump, to change direction, decelerate, accelerate in several sports. We developed a system not to be used in labs. As I mentioned earlier, this type of fatigue is studied since decades in lab with complicated devices, but we wanted a device to be used on the pitch, on the field with athlete and strength and conditioning coach. So we want the measurement of the fatigue with the Myocene system to be easy to do. As you see that the player just sits on the frame, on the device. The measurement is fast because it only takes 2 minutes per leg, so it's basically 5 minutes per athlete, per player. And the device is transportable. You can easily move it from while traveling with the athletes, or it's easy transportable. You understood it. The main game changer in this technology is that it doesn't rely on any voluntary movement from the athlete or subjective perception. The athlete is totally passive during the measurement, so we don't consider any maximum voluntary isometric force contraction or any movements. The player is totally passive. So we can now have a real and fully objective method to know and understand the fatigue of the player. There are 3 main pillars in this technology. There is a very specific neurostimulation, there is a very accurate sensor, and an algorithm. I'm going to show you in the short video how it works, and of course you're very welcome to come afterwards on the booth. You can also try the device, and some of you want to do a fatiguing exercise and measure before and after. That also can be done. So you remember the rationale: low electro-induced contraction, high frequency electro-induced contraction. So this is what you are going to see on the video. The player puts his leg against the sensor. The leg is supposed to be extended, but it cannot be extended. So the stimulator, which is under the device, will trigger contraction. That's the peak that you see on the screen. And the algorithm will compute the power index. It lasts 2 minutes because we do several ratio low to high by increasing the intensity to increase the spatial summation and always recruit new layers of the muscle, so we don't stay on superficial motor units. We go more in depth to get an homogeneous scan of the muscle. Probably you were thinking that, yeah, but what about if I don't place the electrode exactly on the same position, or what about the position of the athlete? Well, this does not affect the ratio because since it's a differential measurement, meaning it's a ratio low to high, even if the forces obtained by low and high frequency are affected by the position of the electrode or the position of the body, this will affect the same way the low and the high frequency, and so the effect gets cancelled. If you produce 5 Newton and 10 Newton or 50 Newton and 100 Newton, the ratio remains the same. That's why we obtain very reliable, repeatable data with the Myocene system. Now, a short example on the lab setting, I will say, on the measurement of fatigue after a fatiguing exercise, and afterwards I will present a couple of case studies in real life. So lab exercise, very easy. We have an athlete, and we ask this athlete to perform a fatiguing exercise of the quad. The main one is a stepper, so it's a stepper or 40 centimeter stepper, and we ask this athlete to repeat 3 series of 250 steps, okay? And we are going to measure at each time point, meaning after each series of steps, the evolution of the power index. We're going to see that if actually the Myocene is sensitive enough to measure the drop of force, so the fatigue after the first series, which you will agree it's a moderate to light exercise for an athlete with a minimum of training. We're going to see if there is a correlation between the fatigue and the load, and if we can quantify this decrease in fatigue, so this power index. The athlete arrived in the lab setting fully rested, so no training in the last 2 days, I would say, and we obtained the value of 80. 80 is the highest value for this player, okay, for this athlete, and the power index measured on different players is usually a value between 50 and 90. We don't compare power indexes in between athletes, and sometimes the power index are different from one leg to another. But you will easily define the highest value by doing a few measurements in a rested condition in order to know which is your highest value, so which is your best value at rest. In this case, in both legs, it's 80. What I didn't mention is that in this fatiguing exercise, there is only just one leg which is exercising, and the other leg is the control leg. So the athlete starts the first series of 250 steps on the stepper, and the other leg is passive, so it's just one leg active. And you see that, indeed, there is a correlation between the load and the fatigue, because the active leg in blue, more we increase the number of steps at each time point. So first series of 250 steps, the index dropped from 80 to 50. The second series from 50 to, I would say, to 40, and then to achieve 35. So we can really quantify the fatigue. We observe that the control leg, there is no fatigue. It's obvious because it's not exercising, that there is a correlation between the fatigue and the load, and that the device is sensitive enough. You don't need to perform a very demanding exercise to observe a drop of force with the Myocene system, so to measure the fatigue with the Myocene system. It's very sensitive, and you can really track the fatigue even on light to moderate exercise. You see that the control leg, there is a slight variation. It's normal to get a slight variation since it's a physiological parameter that we measure, and we consider the coefficient of variability of 2 or 3 points more or 2 or 3 points less. It's like the heart rate. 60, 62, 58 at the end is remain the same. So we have the same with the Myocene system. 2 or 3 points variation is considered as an insignificant variation, which is not considered as fatigue. In terms of scientific validation, I mentioned that this technique exists in labs since decades. So what we did, we compared the Myocene system versus what is supposed to be the gold standard technology, the one used in labs. And we get a publication, it's done by Millet in Saint-Étienne in France, another one in Poitiers, and then since then several universities are doing their own research with the Myocene technology because it's quite easy, because it's a device to be used on real life with athletes and coaches, so it's so easy to measure large cohorts of subjects. Now let's go for the case studies. We have here the assessment of the recovery post-game. This is what you see on the software of the Myocene system. You have 3 sets of values. In blue, left leg, in orange, right leg. This first one that you can see here is the baseline value taken at rest. The other two measurements are the measurement taken the next day of the game. So we have one first game, a few weeks after, another game, and the measurement are taken afterwards. So baseline value cycled in green, and then first game, recovery match day +1, the staff measure the player. Okay, in this case, there is just a slight variation on the right leg, but it's insignificant, good to go, no problem. But look what's happened with this other game. Both legs are definitely lower compared to baseline. So in this case, the athlete didn't recover it. So which has been, why there is a difference between those two games? If we look at the GPS data, in this case, forgive me, it's from football, we have the much more time play, more distance run, more acceleration, more deceleration compared to this situation. And this likely explain why, in this case, the player didn't recover, while the same player in this situation fully recovered. So which has been the decision of the staff? Perfect, you can train on the next day, no, you're good to go, no problem, because you, at least in terms of muscle fatigue, you recovered. But the decision taken from the staff for this game was to enhance recovery modalities and do not train on the pitch on match day +2. Another example, another player, but same situation, baseline and 2 match day +1 values. And here is interesting because there is only one leg which is not recovered while the other is recovered. And that's quite common to observe such type of differences in the capacity of one leg versus another one to resist to fatigue. There are two main reasons for that. The first one is over-solicitation of one leg, sometimes strikers after a lot of kicking, or in basketball for jumping, for instance, or previous injuries. The capacity of the injured leg to become resistant again to fatigue takes a lot of time, and that's why sometimes we observe such type of differences in between legs. Of course, this is key to be very careful when you observe such type of data, because Federico mentioned it, the two main reasons why the risk of injuries is higher is historical aspects, so the previous injuries, and the strengths. And obviously, since the Myocene measure the drop of force, you have here a situation while this player have a significant drop of force on the right leg, which has been potentially injured previously. The decision of the staff has been to not play and not train on match day +2, and in uncongested period, to proceed to specific exercise to reinforce this right leg capacity to resist to fatigue. And then one last example, before I'm done. This is a follow-up on during the July to Feb 2024, and these measurements has been taken before the hardest session of the week. The staff of this team, they want to know if the player is ready to go flat out with maximum intensity, or because there is still some accumulated fatigue or incomplete recovery, if they have to adjust the load according to what they observe with the Myocene system. You see that at the beginning, we are here in the time point in July, which is the preseason, the values are low. This is obvious because of two reasons, potentially the much more demanding intensity of the training during this preseason, and potentially as well because the player is not fully fit yet. You see that more we progress in the time, more the values get high, which means that the recovery is better, more resistance to fatigue. But look what's happened here. There is a significant drop of the power index. And what's happened in this team with 3 players, they have been injured afterwards. So I think this team apply also what Federico just mentioned, an active control of injuries, because nowadays, each time they observe such type of extreme values, there is a report which is sent to the team, and they take a decision. Important to mention as well that thanks to the Myocene system, you have a value which is fully objective. So it is not based on the player perception or not your own gut feeling as a strength and conditioning coach or medical team. This drop of force here, this fatigue, is measured objectively, fully objectively. So you can really report based on fully objective and accurate data to the team. I have one last, which is in this case, it's a bit different case studies. We have one game, and we measure before the game, after the game, 24 hours and 48 hours. The main thing that we observe is that actually this player started the game with already some fatigue, because look at the data of the Myocene measurement 1 day after and 2 days after, the power index are higher. So the baseline value is this one and not this one. So the performance of the player before to start this game has been affected. This is it. Thank you very much. We organize some demonstration in clubs, so feel free to reach out, and so we can come into the clubs, measure the players before and after training, for instance, in order for you to get experience with the Myocene technology.